Good morning, monsters, and happy Monday to everybody out there. I hope the world is treating you well today. And I know there's a lot of hurricanes and stuff happening out there on the coast, so I hope everybody out there is staying safe and dry and doing the best that you guys all can out there. So with that being said, let's move on to what we got here. So we got a big weekend coming up here for myself up here in Upper Michigan. We have an event this weekend, and this weekend also there's a lot of events all over the country, but some of them you just can't get to. And we got an event coming up here that is not only an in-person event, but it is also a virtual event. So I want you guys all to go ahead and check this out.
Are you ready to uncover the mysteries of Bigfoot? Join us for SquatchCon Idaho 2023. This year, we're bringing the magic directly to your screen, or join us in person. Witness the world premiere of the enhanced Paul Freeman Bigfoot footage. Doug Hychek discovered a secret within this enhanced video you'll have to see to believe. Hear from an all-star panel of Bigfoot experts like Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, Cliff Barackman, Brian King-Sharp, and Michael Freeman. But that's not all. Get exclusive online bonuses such as Bigfoot-themed wallpapers, a Bigfoot coloring book, an interactive Bigfoot quiz, Squatch Nut Field Guide, get a copy of the Freeman Bigfoot Files ebook, and more. Whether you attend in person or watch it live online, you'll be part of an unforgettable experience. Don't miss out on this unique opportunity. Secure your spot today. SquatchCon Idaho 2023. Step into the unknown.
That's awesome, guys. If you guys have always wanted to go to a Bigfoot conference and never been able to get out there, or they don't come to your area or so-and-so, it's definitely a great opportunity to get to watch it virtually from the comfort of your own home. So that's awesome. That's going to be this weekend. Virtual tickets or in-person tickets available now, hangar1.com. Guys, if you want to see myself and my team in person this weekend, we are going to be at the MI Paracon in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. There's going to be all kinds of cool paranormal people there, as well as cryptid people, and all kinds of vendors and speakers and seminars. So if you guys can come up to Sault Ste. Marie this weekend for MI Paracon. And then, guys, in September, we are going to be at the Great Lakes Paranormal Conference in Glen Beulah, Wisconsin. That is another multi-day event there, September 22nd through the 24th. And then I'll be doing a presentation at the Kenosha Public Library, October 6th in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Then we go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, October 14th for Milwaukee Paracon at the Irish Cultural and Heritage Center. And of course, then, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be down at CryptidCon once again in Lexington, Kentucky, November 18th and 19th. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be the third year that we are going to be there. So, guys, make sure that you come out and check that out. And as we go on with the show here, if you guys want to show your support for everything here on the Untold Radio Network, here's how you can do that.
Hey, Untold Radio Network fans. Want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
And we have a brand new member. Jocelyn Harris became a member of our YouTube subscribers and a member here. So thank you very much for that. We appreciate it here on the Untold Radio Network. And now, ladies and gentlemen, all right, today, guys, my guest is Marc Myrsell. He is a lifelong land surveyor in Oregon and Washington. Born in 1966, he became and enamored with the quest of lost mysteries. While the rediscovery of the 1924 Ape Canyon Cabin is his claim to fame and infinite riches, he continues to venture into the I cannot read this morning, into the mildew and dust of shadowy paper archives in search of long forgotten stories, taking this evidence to the field to look for physical evidence of the historical monster attacks. I'm looking forward to this, man. All right. So without any further ado, please welcome Marc Myrsell. How's it going, buddy?
Great. Thanks, Barnaby. You should have rehearsed that a couple of times before you introduced me.
I did. That's the problem, though.
I got to say too that with the intro, man, you're super busy. You're all over the place with different conferences and stuff. And
Yeah.
I have to second the emotion on a couple of things that you announced. If anyone attending virtually is great, but if anybody can attend a conference, like you mentioned the lineup at the Idaho gig, all great people, all terrific people, Brian and Cliff and Michael. I hung out with Michael at Pocatello, Idaho conference last year, I think, and that's the first time I met him, and just terrific people. So if you can attend these conferences and just chat with the guests for a little while, they're a wealth of knowledge beyond what they're just presenting, on stage. So if you can make it, do it.
Well, absolutely. They're all wonderful events. I mean, we've done so many this year. We got the opportunity to be at the Ohio Bigfoot conference at Salt Forks this year, and that was a great time as well. I've heard great things about that. So definitely a lot of fun going to these things. So awesome.
Okay, good, cool.
Well, it's absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm looking forward to this for talking to you.
Yeah.
Let's start out a little bit. For those of you who don't know, I mean, I've heard the term land surveyor 100 times, but can you tell us like what that entails and how you got into that and stuff and how that's led to what you're doing now?
Oh, sure. Well, but just a quick primer. A land surveyor is someone that you call if you don't know where your property corners are, to have someone come out and determine where your property corners are. If you need a map of your property, different elevations, if you need to divide your property, almost anything dealing with any kind of tract of land that you own. That's what I do, and that's what I've been doing all my life. The reason why is my dad was a land surveyor. And I grew up just with dad being in private practice my entire life. I think he went into private practice around 63. So I was out in the woods and helping dad, carrying stakes and cutting brush for 50 cents an hour, when I was a kid, when I was like 11 or 12 years old. The reason why I bring it up a lot of the time dealing with historical monster attacks and the kind of research that I do is that when someone calls me for a boundary survey and call any land surveyor, the very first thing that a land surveyor needs to do is a tremendous amount of document research. You need to find what previous surveyors have done in the past, what previous landowners have done in the past, and anything you can, highway records, land records, railroad records, anything. And then once you get that treasure trove of document research, then you have to take that information and try to find the field evidence in the ground of that. As an example, a surveyor set an iron pipe in 1920 way out in the woods, and you need to survey to that. You need to measure to that in order to determine someone else's property boundaries, right? So you have to physically go out and find that iron pipe in the ground and measure to it. Is it the right iron pipe? Is it not the right iron pipe? Is it gone? Is there other field evidence of what took place in these previous surveys on the ground, right? So the way that relates to Bigfoot is that I grew up in sort of this renaissance, if you will, of the early 1970s, mid 70s, of this revitalization of the unknown mysteries of the world, And I ate it all up when I was a kid. like lights in the sky, ghosts, monsters in the woods, pyramids, Atlantis, all that kind of stuff. And I started to, and I've always read a lot about that, which is the best thing that one can do is to read about it in a physical book, because a book is an interactive experience. So I started reading up on all this and started to come across these strange old stories. And it wasn't until I got into adulthood, maybe about 15, 20 years ago, where I came across some of these stories. Some of these stories I've known about pretty much all my life, Pacific Northwest stories. And I started to think, some of these events took place many years ago. Time is relative. Something that happened in 1961 may seem like a long time ago to some people, but it really isn't. And so the idea of something happened 100 years ago or 200 years ago, it's really not that long ago at all. So on some of these older stories, I started to think, well, what if there's some sort of physical evidence that could still be remaining regarding these old stories of these mysteries? And I just ended up taking some of the well-known stories, some of the lesser-known stories, and researching it like I had never heard about it before, or nobody's ever heard about it before, gathering as much document evidence as I can, and then seeing if there's any physical evidence left. And so that's basically one of the first big ones that I did was the 1924 Ape Canyon attack.
Awesome. I have been kind of following along on this. I know you and Cliff had just gone out there recently for the anniversary. It was the 90th anniversary, I think it is.
99.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. Can you give us a little bit of background about the Ape Canyon incident, why it's important, and the story behind it, and then we can kind of talk about your work and what you've done with it.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The whole thing started about 1918 or so, where there was this group of miners in Kelso, Longview, Washington, which was a pretty burgeoning going mill town. It's timber country, and so it's a hot mill town, being right on the Columbia River, so it's good for export. And there are these group of guys, almost all family members. There was a core group of about 5 men, but a couple of other folks had helped them off and on. But this the head of the family was this guy named Marion Smith, and he was about 60 years old, and he had grown up in the big timber, working man. And up on Mount St. Helens, he knew that there was gold up on the mountain. He wasn't a young buck anymore, so he wasn't like working hard full time as if he was 22 years old. And he decided to start poking his way up along the Lewis River, east of Woodland, and up into Mount St. Helens looking for gold. And there are gold claims up there, a few. Down lower, in lower elevation, they tend to be more placer claims of where people are building sluice boxes and that kind of thing. But he was looking for gold up there. He took along a family friend named John Peterson, his cousin Gabe Lefevre, his son-in-law Fred Beck, and then a little bit later took his son Leroy Perry Smith up there. And after hunting and pecking a little bit, in 1922, they finally laid claim to a mine on Mount St. Helens called the Vanderwhite Mine. And this mine was way up there in a very precarious location. At the time, really the closest road where you could park was maybe about 5 or 6 miles away. And this is way up at the timberline of Mount St. Helens, like around 4,000, 4,500 elevation. And you can only go up there during certain parts of the year because there's just too much snow in the winter. So it was kind of a limited time for working. They started working the mine in 22, and apparently, according to Smith and Fred Beck, the assays were pretty good. They were getting gold out of this mine. I had talked to some people before the mountain erupted. They had seen that mine, and it went in about 75 feet or so. So these guys were really working it hard. In the first 2 years, they were just tent camping on the other side of Pumice Butte. and setting up their tent and bringing in their stuff every year and going up and over the butte to work the mine. Well, while they were up there, off and on, they would hear these high-pitched whistling sounds coming from a ridgetop at night, and they didn't know what it was. You got to remember that especially the older guys like Lefevre and Smith, Peterson, these guys had been out in the woods all of their life, and they had seen pretty much everything that there was to see, but they weren't exactly sure what these sounds were. It wasn't elk. It wasn't like any sound that they had heard before, particularly since there would be a high-pitched whistling sound, and then from another ridgetop there would be a response call, and it would go back and forth for a little while at night. At one point in 22 or 23, Leroy Smith, the youngest, was going to down to a stream, down to a bit of a sandbar, and to scrub out pots and pans, and he found this very, very large human-like print in the sand. The odd thing about it is that it was only a singular print. There wasn't a trackway leading up to it or leading away from it. These sounds were starting to get kind of a little disturbing, and Smith had finally ordered the rest of the guys in the camp to not leave. Nobody leaves the camp without being armed. You need to take your sidearm, a rifle with you, something, because they would hear all these other strange sounds up there. Despite being a little bit spooked, they decided that the assays were good enough. At the end of 1923, when they returned in the spring of 24, they were going to build a cabin right by the mine in early spring, and that's what they did. A cabin to hold their tools, a few stores over the winter, so they didn't have to schlep their stuff 6 miles back and forth every year. So when they returned in 1924, they started building a cabin very close to the mine. They had blasted out a small shelf and started building a 10 by 20 foot cabin. And it was just before the 4th of July in 1924. They weren't working on the cabin 24/7. They were working it off and on while they were still working on the mine. And Smith and Beck were going to a nearby spring, and to where their water source was, and about 100 feet from the cabin. And while they're going down there, Beck sees from behind a cedar tree this large hair-covered bipedal creature peeking out from behind the tree. Well, things, they had kind of got keyed up and wound up a little bit. So the first thing that Fred does is he takes 3 shots at the creature. And the story was that you could see the bark skinning along the side of the cedar tree, apparently right into the animal. They go down to the tree, and there's no animal, there's no blood, there's no hair, there's no nothing. And they can see going up the other side, up the draw, they see the creature going up the draw, looking behind them, and just keeps on going. The guys go back to Longview Kelso for the 4th of July, and they tell their family about it. And a lot of the friends and family couldn't really kind of square the information about these large ape-like creatures up on the mountain, because the Beck Smith family were known to be quite honest, square, good guys. But they're coming down off the mountain with these stories of monsters up there. So they return to the cabin after the 4th of July, and they were only up there for about a week, because things broke loose really, really quickly. The guys were in the mine, and Leroy was coming back from the spring, and he hears something rattling in the bushes, and this creature is coming out from the bushes right by the cabin. And you have to realize that the topography of this cabin site is incredibly steep. I mean, it's like incredibly steep, so it's really limited flat area. So I was thinking that with the conditions on the ground today, this creature was only like 50 feet, 70 feet away from him. Takes shots into the creature, and the creature just turns around and goes back into the bush. On Thursday, July the 10th of 1924, the guys are in the cabin. Leroy's coming back again from the spring, and a creature comes out from the bush. Leroy takes 1 shot into it. The guys hear the shots, and they come out of the cabin fully armed, and they're blasting at this creature. Marion Smith estimated about 16 rounds went into this creature, and the last shot was taken by Beck, and the creature is just right on the edge of the canyon. The cabin is like pretty much right on the precipice going down about 200 feet. And Beck took the last shot, and the creature either fell or the creature crouched down and climbed down into the canyon. At that point, it's getting to be kind of dusk-ish that night on Thursday, and the guys were talking, this is weird. We got to get the hell out of here. In the morning, we're going to leave. At that point, something very, very big and hard hits the side of the cabin, enough to knock out a piece of log chinking between the logs. And the guys look through the hole, and they can see 6 or 7 of these big shadowy creatures going around the cabin. The creatures are starting to get up on the roof, pounding their way in. They're throwing rocks in there. Later, I found out that one of the creatures had been attempting to dig underneath the foundation, beating on the door. So the guys started to tear apart the bunks, and they blockade the door, and they start shooting through the roof. This happens all night long. They build up the fire through the ventilator cap, and they're building up the fire, and they're like, please leave us alone. The attack happens all night on the cabin. And one of the things is that Beck said later, it's like, you go away and we'll go away and we'll all be happy in the morning. And in the morning, sun comes up, it's all quiet, and they open up the door, and the outside is entirely littered with rocks and these very, very large prints ranging between 14 to 17 inches or so. And it was, grab your gun and grab your tobacco and let's get the hell out of here. And they walked back to the truck 6 miles or so. When they get back into town, they do on that Friday, they do what I would have done, is like, I need a drink. So they went to the local bar called the Blue Ox Tavern, and they on the walk out, they were saying, don't tell anybody. They're going to think we're crazy. But how can you not talk about it after such a traumatic event? So they talked to the bartender about it, and then word got out into the newspapers, and we had the Associated Press wire at that time in the newspapers, and it just spread like wildfire across the newspapers. I found it as far east as Missouri and up into Canada and down around San Diego, where the story spread within about 3 or 4 or 5 days.
Wow. That's impressive. That is a fantastic story. So now going back to what we talked about first, with your history of land surveying and looking up these important places, what you have here is an amazing story, and it's in the newspaper and it was told. But again, even if these guys are very reliable, very true, how do you know that this isn't a fabrication? And then this is where you come in, is you were actually able to go out and find this location. Can you tell us how you found where it was and the things that led up to that?
Well, the fascinating thing is that the Ape Canyon story is sort of like, I hate to use this word, but one of the Bigfoot classics, like the Albert Ostman story. Or maybe you want to say maybe the Jerry Crew discovery of the print in Northern California, but it's a Bigfoot classic, right? And so it's been told, it's been retold. Fred Beck published a book called "I Fought the Ape Men of Mount St. Helens" in '67, I believe, along with his son and Ronald Beck. And for the most part, the retelling has been somewhat consistent between all the different versions. There hasn't been a lot of variation, a little bit. But the thing, when I got into it is a fascinating story. So I started to think, because of my proximity, I was just living in Vancouver, Washington, about an hour and a half from this area, from Ape Canyon. And I started to think, well, maybe there's more document evidence besides just the retelling in a Bigfoot book or in a book like Weird Washington or even Fred Beck's book. Maybe there's more to it. So I started getting back into the document evidence, the mining record, the newspaper record, death records, and I found out that there was this massive amount of document evidence of this time, of this event, that was contemporary documentation of it. I mean, almost every miner was interviewed within about 2 or 3 days of the event, and so there was a tremendous amount of information. One of the greatest articles was an article 2-part by a sports reporter named Jack Gregory out of the Oregonian, and he didn't interview any of the miners, but he took a 2-day trip to go up to the site, down the slope, down to the cabin, spent the night there with the deputy sheriff out of Cowlitz County and his son, and then came back home through Castle Rock. And he published a 2-part series within about a week after the attack. Well, what Gregory did is that he didn't give me explicit directions of how to get to the cabin in 1924, but there were plenty of clues, because he described how he got up there and how he got down to the cabin, what he saw, that kind of thing. And he fortunately took some pictures, and he took 2 images of the cabin, of the long side and the short side. And in there, you could see some other features in and around the cabin site. And so with his description, with the mining record, there was never a map of the mine. It was just a small written description of that there basically is a mine here. But there was enough clues about where that cabin and mine could have been, enough for me to start thinking that this area may have been spared from the first 1980 eruption of the mountain. So in 2011, I started taking all my basket full of clues, and I started going up there and looking for it. And just every 2 or 3 times a year, it's not easy to get to, and it's incredibly dangerous, where you're going up Pumice Butte, which is about 200 or 300 feet tall, and then down about 900 feet along a really a precipitous slope full of scree and loose rock and all this jazz. But so I would be poking my way down a little bit more each trip, looking for any kind of evidence. The biggest piece of evidence that I was looking for is that in one of Gregory's photos, you can see the stumps that were freshly cut in order to fall the trees to build the cabin. And most people know, and it's actually used in land surveying, that trees can be used as land corners or references to land corners. And even if the tree is cut down, when the tree starts bleeding sap, to a degree, it starts preserving that stump that you just cut down. The point being is stumps can last for a very, very long time in the woods. And particularly up there, where it's nearly alpine conditions, where there's a lot of snow, but come springtime, the snow melts, and the rest of it's rather arid up there at that time. So stumps can last for a very long time up there. So as I'm poking my way along, I knew that if I could find stumps, I knew I would be close, because I talked to the head archaeologist at the National Forest, a guy named Rick McClure. He's since retired, and he confirmed that that limited area had never been commercially logged. It was just way too dangerous. But there are very massive trees down there that survived the eruption. Near this area, there's a Douglas fir that's, golly, it must be about 7 feet in diameter or so. So it's way pre-eruption. And so on 2013, I had never gone with anybody else, but in 2013, some friends were bugging me. I was talking about it like all the time, like a midlife crisis. And they're like, okay, can you take us? Can you take us? And I'm like, okay. So 5 of us go up there, and we get up to the top of the butte, ready to go down. And frankly, the rest of my friends kind of chicken out because it looks way too dangerous. It is. But there was one friend named Gabe who did go with me down to the bottom. And we get to an area where I hadn't been before, and it's just this monstrous, huge patch of vine maple. And Gabe's a little bit in front of me. He's only in front of me like 30 or 50 feet. We can just talk to each other. I can't see Gabe because of the vine maple, but Gabe's like, Mark, I just found a stump. And then we found another stump. And then we found another stump, and break out the metal detector. And we ended up that day finding 2 sides of the cabin foundation. It was only about 4 inches, 5 inches underground. We found the foundation of the cabin with the nails still driven into it. Found one of the miner spoons. Found some baling wire, which I think I've recently identified in another photograph of the interior of the cabin. So we started finding all this stuff. So that's when we found it in 2013. And then in 2014, we found some other items. We found a broken off bucksaw blade about 8-10 inches long or so, where the miners had broken a saw trying to build the cabin. So that's basically the short story. Sorry, that is the short story of how the cabin was found in 2013.
So I've been kind of following along this stuff, and that there's nothing really left of the cabin anymore. It's just the foundation, as you said, right? Yeah.
When you're out there, you wouldn't know that you're at the cabin site. It's just trees and rocks. Yeah. And honestly, on the recent trip that we did last July with Keith and Cliff and Brad and I, the mountain is starting to swallow the cabin site. It was just the right place, right time. Cliff and I were talking about it. It was sort of the right place at the right time in that period of 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, where I just happened to make it there at the right time. Because if I went down there today, finding those clues that I did find 10 years ago would be a whole heck of a lot more difficult to say, okay, I'm going to start looking here. Some of the stumps are actually like disappearing. The whole site is getting seriously overgrown. I was planning on Brad and I were planning on spending the night down there at the cabin site, but there simply isn't any flat spot anymore. You can barely see where the cabin was. So yeah, you're out there. You would without really working hard, you would have zero idea that that's where the cabin is.
Wow. Do you have any a place where people can see pictures or any video of what you found out there?
Yeah, well, I'm a technological dinosaur. So fortunately, I have a very good friend named Ty, and he has recently made it's like brand spanking new, made a website for me, and it's monsterhistory.net. And there's some information on there. There's going to be more information on there as well. And then you can just find me on Facebook too, because I'm always blathering on about Bigfoot and Ape Canyon and other historical monster projects as well. So yeah, I always have stuff up.
Awesome. All right, we are going to take a really quick break here for station identification. And guys, if you have any questions about any historical Bigfoot encounters or monster attacks, including Ape Canyon, get them on the comments there, put them in all caps, and then I can see them. And also a great way that you can get that is super chats, and this will tell you all about that.
Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Awesome. We are back here with Marc Myrsell. He is a land surveyor and Bigfoot expert and not expert historian. And yeah, I caught myself there. It's morning here, man. Even if it's noon, I just woke up. We're going strong here.
That's cool. Oh, that's cool. You know, there was one thing, Barney, that I thought about during the break there about catching up on some of the projects that I'm doing, and I'd have to give a couple of plugs here to some really good friends who I'm helping, and they're helping me as well. Cliff is part of he and Melissa's museum, the North American Bigfoot Center. He, of course, the NABC does Patreon stuff. And Cliff and I are working on a Patreon NABC film on Ape Canyon. And so I'm going to recommend that. And he and I did some filming up there. And so I would recommend that people keep an eye on the NABC, and of course become a Patreon member, and you'll find out when this film is coming out about Ape Canyon. On another project that I've been working on for a few years, this is down in Southwest Oregon, and I'm calling it the Thompson Flat Monster. A lot of people know it as the Wild Man of the Sixes, where there's a whole long series of encounters over the period of about 30 years, as well as some, believe it or not, some attacks on a gold mining cabin, and actually where some miners ended up dead by unknown means, with their bodies beaten to a pulp or their heads bashed in, all the same time where this incredibly aggressive set of creatures were there bothering these guys. So I got a call about 2 years ago from Bobo Fay. And Bobo was like, Mark, we got to do a film on this project. So we've been working on that, particularly Bobo. Fortunately, all the filming is done and all the editing. So the Wild Man of the Sixes project of mine is coming out in film form too, from Bobo.
Awesome. That's very cool. So did you say that other mining was in the same area as this? As Ape Canyon?
No, it's not. It's almost exactly one state away, where Mount St. Helens is in the southwest corner of Washington. The Thompson Flat Monster is down in the southwest corner of Oregon, about 10 miles from the ocean, about 60 miles north of the California-Oregon border.
Very good. I misheard. I thought you said that they were on the same area of the mining area, but okay. Awesome. Very cool. Do you know of any other stories of any other miners or loggers or anything around the Ape Canyon area that have reported instances?
Not any miners that I know of, but plenty of loggers and or people working in the woods. The Ape Canyon miners described these creatures as mountain devils. Of course, it wasn't until J.W. Burns termed the term Sasquatch, and even that started not to get too widespread. So these guys didn't know the word Sasquatch. The term Bigfoot was often attributed to the Jerry Crew incident, as far as the invention of that word, and or the reporter down in Eureka. But I have to say that actually the term Bigfoot was coined back in the 1920s. I did find record of someone using the word Bigfoot in the 20s. Regardless, I digress. The miners really didn't know the term Bigfoot. They called them mountain devils. But the story of this Bigfoot creature in the woods was not unknown to the Euro-American culture. It certainly wasn't widespread, but Smith knew other people who had been working in the woods or having rec time in the woods, like fishing or hunting or whatever, where they had encountered, and there were stories of encounters up around Mount St. Helens, on the north side, around the Toutle River, along the south side, along the Lewis River, where there were these encounters that were talked about, completely unexplained, nothing terribly aggressive, except, say, just like a regular road crossing or an encounter in the woods that only lasts a few seconds. But this was known for, off and on a little bit. But certainly up on Mount St. Helens, there were plenty of, one in particular, there were plenty of much older stories, old-time stories, that, as they say, amongst the Yakima Nation, amongst the Klickitat Nation, amongst the Chehalis Cowlitz Nation as well. The reason why is because Mount St. Helens today and forever is really, really big on huckleberry because of the elevation, because of the dense woods. Huckleberry grow like crazy up there. And so these nations that were living around Mount St. Helens all ended up kind of gathering huckleberry up on Mount St. Helens together. And there's a story that keeps getting repeated over and over again, where at Spirit Lake got its name not from this sort of idea of this great spirit in the wood, is great spirit in the sky, sort of like, kind of stereotypical Western Indian movies kind of stuff. What the spirit of Spirit Lake actually referred to was what they called mountain spirits. There was a tribe of people, and they were known as Siatik or Siatich. And there were not very many in number of these people that lived up above Spirit Lake. They were elusive. They didn't like to be bothered at all. And an old time story was that sometimes when these people, Yakima Cowlitz, humans, would be going up there to collect camping and to collect food, once in a while, a young kid would go missing. Particularly a younger woman, 11, 12, 13 years old. Particularly, oddly enough, it was covered with red. If she had red hair, she'd go missing. And then once in a while, she would end up being returned, almost like a changeling kind of story, about 5 or 6 years later. Well, enough kids were disappearing where, according to the old story, the humans got together with the Siatik and they said, look, we're going to leave. We're never, ever coming back if you stop taking our kids. Also, what we want is that the Siatik would steal a kid and stuff him in this huge basket, almost like a backpack, and take off with them. So the humans said, well, if you show us how to make these baskets, we're going to leave and never come back. And that was the deal. They learned how to make these baskets. And so these baskets are traditionally used for huckleberry collecting, and they come in different forms. And in some of the weaving, once in a while, these images are woven into these baskets, and you can see, oh, that's a deer, that's an elk, that's a human. But then there's this other image of this much taller, semi-human looking creature with pointy head, no neck, narrow hips, much more menacing, larger than the human images. It was around 1924 where a reporter, a member of the Klallam Nation named George Totsky, talked about the Siatik and basically told the same story, except for the fact that these people named the Siatik happened to be 7 or 8 feet tall and covered entirely with reddish brown hair.
That's fascinating, really. So they think that the Sasquatches or these creatures were making these baskets first. That's what I'm kind of getting out of that. And they taught them. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. That's one of the origin stories of the local basket art, the local basket manufacturing. There's 2 other stories. One rather kind of banal story is an old time story between cedar, the tree, and squirrel, as far as the origin of the baskets. But there are other origin stories of the basket that are somewhat similar to the Spirit Lake Siatik story, where the baskets are taught to humans by one of 3 ogre sisters that live in the woods. And one of the ogre sisters, monsters in the woods, was the one who taught the people how to make baskets. But yeah, there's, as far as how humans, all the local humans, say in Southwest Washington, Western Washington, how they learned the basket was something having to do with some sort of monster in the woods, some sort of large, like bipedal kind of monstrous human kind of creature in the woods. So yeah, that's some of the old time stories of these folks that live up there.
Wow. I keep picturing, I just have Krampus now. the spirit of Christmas and stuff, the dark entity that picks up these children and throws them in his sack or in his basket. And I'm picturing that kind of same thing as you're telling these stories, and how, like, is this kind of the same kind of story, and like how things kind of evolved from there. Have you thought about any of that?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with one detail about the Krampus stealing children. With Krampus, do you know, are the children ever returned, or are they just gone forever with the Krampus stories?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I know it's usually the bad children are taken, so it's still all kind of falls under that Fae mythology, like you said, the changelings and stuff. But I
That's
can't
exactly right.
whether or not they ever get returned or not.
With the children that are stolen in the old stories, but actually I have one story that's not that old, of the children being stolen. Sometimes they're gone forever. Sometimes they are returned, but they're only returned many years later. One of the one of the Cowlitz families around here is a last name of Wanasay. And Frank Wanasay was interviewed as a native Cowlitz guy with old time stories in 1924 during the Ape Canyon publicity, and it was actually Frank's mother, I believe, or his grandmother was one of the last people to be known to have been stolen. And there is a photo of her, and it's almost like a studio portrait. In her later life, she was known as Indian Mary or Eye Patch or One Eye, because she had lost an eye sometime in her adulthood. And it's a studio portrait with her very long gray hair and an eye patch. And she's buried in Woodland. And apparently, the story goes was that she was taken as a very, very young girl, 10, 11 years old, and then returned when she was about 16 or 17. And much like the Fae, much like the fairies, changeling stories, she came back and she was very different. She was not good, apparently, socially. She was distant, had a hard time dealing with other humans around her. She was just a different person and lives the rest of her days. Didn't talk about at all her time of being gone. She simply wouldn't talk about it, except that the family knew that they were up there on the mountain, and they turn around and she's gone. And then suddenly she shows up back around the Columbia River, which is driving time today. It's about an hour and a half away, about 70, 80 miles away from Mount St. Helens, and shows up inexplicably. Why she was missing, nobody knows.
I wish I would have paid more attention to it. I just read an article today on Facebook about a girl that disappeared and just came back 6 years later.
Really?
And I can't remember where it was or anything. I just kind of was skimming through Facebook earlier today, and it was a girl, and she went missing, and she just showed back up 6 years later. So it's very, very reminiscent of this. I don't even know where it was, honestly, but that's just...
If you come across it again, send it to me, and I'll start looking too. It's like some of the David Pilates famous stories of that really, really young guy. I can't remember. He was like 3 or 4 years old, and he was missing for like 3 or 4 days. And then the search and rescue found him, miles and miles away from where he got lost outside of camp. So Again, like Mary wanna say, this was only about 100 years ago or so, but disappearing children, especially disappearing children up in rugged mountainous areas, still happen, And I don't want to attribute like to any kind of like monsters or woo or anything to every missing person in the woods, certainly not. But there are sometimes weird circumstances and weird questions that crop up as well.
Absolutely. We are coming up here on the end of this hour here, and I wanted to get some comments and questions here. Bigfoot Society wants to say hey and love you to you.
Thanks, Jeremiah.
Brian McMahon here says infinite riches. Whoever wrote that, kudos. That's in your bio. I love that line as well. And Lee Warner would like to know if you know anything about the Teddy Roosevelt story that he had talked about. And have you gotten any research into that, or what can you tell us about that one?
Only a little bit. The Roosevelt Bauman story. There are two great friends out in Montana who looked into it a little bit, and we just kind of been chatting a little bit. Tom and Katie Ertz. They're really great researchers and good friends, and we have talked about the Roosevelt Bauman story. And I think that Katie's right. I think that there is so little document evidence of the Bauman and Roosevelt stuff, at least right now, because what's been written about is sort of what the Ape Canyon story was, humbly speaking, before I got into it. It was just almost campfire stories, just little bits written here and there. Katie had a very, very good point. That really the next step, and maybe hopefully I'll get around to it on Roosevelt. It's going to require a Freedom of Information Act request from National Archives. And I gotta say another shout out to every librarian and every archivist. They're so dedicated and so helpful. My friends at National Archives and State Archives have just been great. And when I tell them that I'm looking into a Bigfoot story, they get even more excited and dig a little bit more. So on Roosevelt Bauman, it's a project I would like to tackle, but we need a lot more information before we can start pinpointing about where this happened and any more information about it.
Awesome. I know you mentioned this earlier as well. Another very famous story, the Albert Ostman story. I know a lot of people have differing opinions on that. What is your opinion? Do you think that it's a factual story, an actual incident, or do you think that was all fabricated?
I really can't say yes or no, whether it was factual or whether it was not. The reason being is because all we really have is John Green's interview with Albert Ostman. That's all we have. And that was done 40 years after the fact. There was very, very little that was talked about the Ostman incident until John Green tracked him down and interviewed him. There is a little bit of a holy grail, if you will, to the Ostman story. And I got this from Scott and Hannah. And Scott said that he had come across somebody who knew somebody else, who apparently had a photocopy, I don't think the original, but a photocopy of Albert Ostman's diary from many years ago. So I bugged Scott a lot about it, and I was like, you got to get it. And so unfortunately, the fellow who told him that he had the Ostman diary kind of ghosted a little bit, and Scott hasn't been able to get a hold of him again. There are a lot of problems with Ostman's story of with the idea of him tricking these creatures with snuff and being able to escape and get back to civilization, apparently without shoes, which was like a long ways away. There's some of those examples, plus not really great geographic calls in his story where we can actually pinpoint where this is. Another great longtime researcher, John Kirk III, has looked into that rather hard as far as trying to pinpoint about where he was taken. But there's a lot of missing information. So again, until more document evidence shows up, I don't know. I certainly don't know. But one thing about Ostman's story, these Bigfoot classics, even though there's not a lot of perhaps veracity to the story, or not a lot of detail, it certainly grabbed your attention. It grabbed my attention. enough to propel a lot of people into looking into the Sasquatch phenomenon more. And I think it really gave birth to, well, I don't know what you want to call it, second, third, fourth generation of the four horsemen. I think that's where we are now. We're sort of the fourth generation after Green and DeHinden and Patterson, and all that stuff really inspired us.
Absolutely. All right, man. I appreciate everything that you've done, all your hard work and dedication into the topics and stuff. That's amazing that people are out there actually doing the research to try and, prove that these stories are real or hoaxed, and that, because that's at the end of the day, this is an amazing story. The whole Ape Canyon situation, it's, Bigfoot legend and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's just a story unless you have the facts to back it up. And everybody bats the eye, that Bigfoot is just a hoax. There's no proof and stuff. And then you've stepped forward, looked at the actual documentation to prove that this place actually existed. The story, whether the story's true or not, but you have the backup that says the place existed, the people existed, the mine existed. Everything else falls into place. So I really appreciate your hard work.
And well, thanks, man. The one thing as sort of like maybe a punchline as we're wrapping this up is that right in for Ape Canyon, right inside the foundation of the cabin, about 4, 5, 6 years ago, we were able to find right inside the box of the foundation, we found a brass cartridge, and it was, as best we can tell, a 30-30 cartridge, which is the rifle that Fred Beck was using, and it is plain old. It is a very, very old cartridge. So whether the story is true, whether they shot at these creatures or not, I don't know. But we found a bullet cartridge inside the foundation of the cabin. There you go.
I would assume you should find a lot more if they shot at these things all night, though. That's
right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So wrapping up here, man, tell us, what are you working on now? What are you researching? And where can we find more about you? And where can people see this information? And do you have any conferences or anything that you're going to be speaking at coming up?
No, as far as conferences, I'm available. People can get a hold of me. I don't have anything scheduled right now. I was doing conferences hot and heavy. My last one was in Forks. But no, I don't have anything scheduled right now. But for right now, yeah, you can get a hold of me on Facebook with my name, or monsterhistory.net if you want to check out my website, which is going to be growing. We're going to be adding more to it, I swear. But right now, no project is ever done. No project is ever done. There's more to do on Ape Canyon. There's a lot more to do on Thompson Flat. 3 or 4 other projects we didn't have time to get into. I'm going to be dead before I'm done on any of these projects. So.
Awesome. Well, best of luck to you. Keep up the good work, man.
Right on. Thanks so much.
Thank you for being on the show today, Mark.
You betcha. Okay. Thanks, man.
All right, guys. Marc Myrsell, historian, land surveyor, historical researcher on Ape Canyon and all kinds of other Bigfoot historical stories, we'll say. And awesome interview. So thank you so much for being on the show today and joining us here on the Untold Radio Network. Coming up next week, right here, same time, same place, we have Matt Pruitt is going to be on talking about his brand new book. And it's an awesome book. Make sure you guys go check it out. That'll be next week here on Monday. I am tired, man. On Monsters on the Edge on the Untold Radio Network. We'll see you on the edge.